your shirt there. I used to tell my students I got all the education I needed reading their hats and shirts, and sometimes that was more information than I needed. It's been a long time since I've been up in front of a classroom. That is familiar, but that's not. We used to use slide rules for our calculations. Most of you probably don't know what a slide rule is. I think I have one over here. Aha! Slide rule. Old school calculator, made of wood, you don't have to change the batteries. But a lot has changed since I was a teacher. All you young men would have been in shirts and ties, and we've all had assigned seats. It does bring me back, though. Brings me back to how I became a teacher in the first place. Harold Hauser, come inside, we have a problem. See, it was at the end of my master's program. I had to give a thesis, and what was given to me was second-order differential equations of the gyroscopic motion of aquatic maneuvers. Now, when I went up for my degree, they had the entire math faculty there and half from the physics faculty, and it was an experience because the math people didn't quite understand the physics, and for the physics people, second-order differential equations was not something they used all that often. I think I got through the degree because of them not knowing what questions to ask that they understood. But afterwards, I'm called over to the math offices. Have this physics professor come up to me and say, Harold Hauser, come inside, we have a problem. So I did. What's the problem? Laying on his desk was a file with my name on it. He opened it up, pulled out my thesis, and set it aside. Pulled out another paper I was far less familiar with. Your GI Bill runs out next month. What are you going to do? Well, I'll get a job. I've checked your records. You were an instructor while in the Marine Corps. You were a drill instructor and taught while in the artillery school. How was that? It was an experience. Now, I was never one of those drill instructors who yelled at their recruits. I was firm with them, and I think they respected me, but I knew others that would shoot the ground off between their feet to make them go higher, faster. I didn't do that. I think they respected me, but I was firm with them. That first day, though, we would go out, and we would run. I would have them get their full uniform on and shoes on, and we would run. I would call the hospital beforehand, have them send ambulances out to pick up the young men when they dropped. And we'd start running. And some of the young men didn't take much over 100 yards before they hit their maximum, and they kept running, dropping. Medics were there to pick them up, take them back by ambulances, and some intersect by jeeps. This one recruit, we were 14, 15 miles out, he was still running right by my side. So that's when I decided to run us back over by the offices. And I go in to keep me from falling. I check his record. He had been a marathon runner out of Louisiana State University. Probably just getting warmed up. And at the artillery school, lots happened at the artillery school. Where I taught after boot camp. We were shooting on the 105 howitzers, and they have 7 different powder charges you put in. That's what goes off, that's what shoots the round. And you always started at charge 1, firing to a base point, and we went on from there. This one young man, first time firing, he cuts off 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, supposedly to throw in what we call the powder pit. We just set it off later with fire. And instead, he sticks it in the other brass that was there. Next time we were firing from that gun, we were firing at charge 5. So we took his 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, stuck it in there on top of his 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, and we fired. When we did, it blew the trails off of the guns. Now, several of the young men coming up asking me, oh, where's it gonna go? And I said, well, if we're lucky and it doesn't go too far out, it'll still be on Camp Pendleton. The chance of hitting an infantry division out there is rather slight. Now, if we have some success and it goes all the way out into the Pacific Ocean, well, it's not going to cause anyone any trouble. Now, in between there was Highway 101, the Santa Fe Railroad, and the town of San Clemente. 30 minutes later, we get a phone call from the general. There had been a report of an artillery shell in San Clemente. So they asked me to go out and do the crater analysis on it. And it landed in a guy's backyard. And even though it was an on-impact round, the best I can figure, it was a little over 11 feet in the ground when it went off. Blew a hole in the guy's backyard. Knocked some limbs off the little trees there, even broke a window, but that was because of the sheer velocity it was flying at. Only thing I ever heard was that he got a free swimming pool out of his backyard. Then there was in Iwo Jima. The Artillery Fire Direction Center had been hit, the FEC as we call it. They were hit non-operational. I don't know how many of the artillerymen were lost, but Colonel comes up to me and says, "Can your people run the Artillery Fire Direction Center?" And I had to answer that no. My people only ran 4.2-inch mortars. But since I had taught at the artillery school, I said I could run it. So, for the next 72 hours, I never had less than 7 phones around my neck, communicating with forward observers, guys out in the field telling you what you're hitting, and the artillery. Fire mission, battalion, 1 round, deflection 2900, elevation 784, stand by, fire! I had to be running the boards, which was calculating the direction, the angle that the artillery is firing at. Now, most of the time, you were just changing up or down depending on how far you were firing out. So we called the elevation of the shot. This was dependent on a lot of things. Propellant temperature, distance you need to shoot, atmospheric conditions, sometimes even the curvature of the earth. Now yes, copy. Most times you were simply moving longer or further, depending on what your forward observer was telling you. Then, after changing it, you got your new numbers, and you called out your artillery. Fire mission, battalion, 1 round, deflection 2900, elevation 789, stand by, fire! It was only then, 72 hours later, they told me the Artillery Fire Direction Center was back up and running, and I could be relieved. I simply dropped on the floor, exhausted. I think I went to sleep instantly. I was grateful to never have to do that again, but I liked the math. I was good at it. So I'd probably get a job involving math. I even accidentally broke top secret code once. This was the GCT, the General Classification Test. Supposedly all Marine recruits had to take it. My division took it from midnight to 6 a.m. And all the scores came back. Everyone was so shocked by my numbers, my drill instructors and everyone. I could not figure out why. Turns out I got a 143. They thought it was an IQ test because, well, most people didn't get over a 115 and truck drivers would be 70-some. But I got a 143. Well, over in Japan, I met another guy. He had a 143, second lieutenant. I got out egotistically wanting to figure out whose was higher. See, it took these 4 tests. Mathematics computation, reading, pattern analysis, and reasoning. Now these combined up to give you your score. But they didn't add up quite directly, so there must have been a multiplier for each one that multiplied each figure to get you to your total score. Now, it wasn't until I was overseas that I got to see what each of my original scores were. So, I got busy doing 4 variables and 4 unknowns using determinants and all to figure out what each multiplier must have been. And I eventually figured out that I got just a little bit higher than you'd on 143. And this guy back from Korea, he was on the ship back asking me, "Now what do they mean, your general classification scores?" And so I tried to explain to him. So this multiplied by reading analysis and this one by reasoning. That's when the colonel aboard the ship comes walking by. He overhears me and says, "Sarge, come into my office." And so I do. "Don't you know those are all top secret, classified values?" I said, "Well, sir, I calculated them myself." "Oh, you can't." Well, I did. So I tried to explain to him the determinants and 4 variables and 4 unknowns, which he didn't quite get. But all he said to me was, "Well, Sarge, don't go sharing those numbers anymore." He dismissed me. See, that's where we could have gotten into a little bit of trouble. On the promotion for sergeant, you're supposed to take this test in your field. And they hand out the test, and I sit down to take it, and this test, I had written it. When I was an instructor at the artillery school, they asked me to write a test for a promotion, and that was it. So I filled in all the answers, brought it up to the lieutenant there, who said to me, "You couldn't have finished that fast. You didn't have that knowledge?" I said, "Well, no, sir, I wrote the test." "You what?" "I wrote the test. I was an instructor, and they asked me to write a test. Here it is." Well, when the scores came back, I had a perfect paper, and no one can believe you can take the test and get a perfect paper, but it helps when you write the test. So I made sergeant on the test I wrote. What about teaching? You said what? Now, after school. What about teaching? You were instructor while in the Marine Corps? Drill instructor? What about teaching? I said, "Well, I think I can do that." He turned around, picked up the phone, called the superintendent of schools in Pasco, Washington, and said, "You're hiring this man." That's how I became a teacher. I was married at this time to my beautiful wife, Melba. Coming back from the service, ran into her first time in a drugstore. She was there swatting flies. The first thing I ever called her was a murderer. We went to school at Southwestern College, I on the GI Bill, which was not much in those days. And then Washington State University, where I got my master's in mathematics, and offered the job at Pasco, Washington, where we moved, and I met with the superintendent. "Now I know we hired you to teach full-time at the community college, but would you also teach the high school physics classes?" I said, "Sure, I don't see why not." Not knowing anything about what I was getting myself into. First day of class, I had 26 students, 24 of whom fathers had doctor's degrees and worked out at Hanford Research Center. Hanford, known for making the first atomic bombs, but at that time they were mostly known for their uranium and plutonium development. This one young man takes my first test, sits down, writes his name. Garth Anderson. Alias, Albert Einstein, John Watts, Isaac Newton, Nikola Tesla. And so, I took his score, divided it by 5, and gave each of these fellas either 18 or 19 points. I told Garth he was going to have to work like everything to get a good grade by the end of the semester. Now, Garth was mad. Angry, throwing books, throwing chairs. 2 days later, I get called down to the office. I have a phone call. It was from his father. Now, I have to admit, I was a little worried. His father was head of chemical research there at Hanford. But I pick up the phone, say my name, and he says to me, "Thank you. You are the first teacher who's ever stood up to Garth since he started school." Garth was a character. One time comes up to me and says, "Mr. Hauser, explain so-and-so to me." And I told him I'd never heard of that. "Oh, well, you should, you're the teacher." And I told him I would try doing some research. The research in the 1950s was very different than today. I couldn't find anything, so I called his father. And I asked him, "What is this?" Where did you hear that? That's top secret.
I told him, well, someone's been talking at home.
Hanford at that time wasn't knowing everything that was going to happen with uranium and plutonium. They were just able to get what they wanted. What they wanted was the bomb. They also needed to figure out what radiation effects would be. Now, I worked there summers when I wasn't teaching. So those things you just enjoy. Well, I enjoy the benefits of having a paycheck. One of the first summers out there, I was given 5 grams short of a critical mass of plutonium and asked to take it out at different distances and measure the radiation to see what effect the distance would have on the radiation. I always teased them, if I could only find 5 more grams, I could have made a bomb. Next summer out there, I redesigned the shield the workers carry to tell them how much radiation they received and show them how thick of material you need to shield a body from radiation. But it was one of my last summers out there. I was called into my boss, Dr. Drumheller's office, who says to me, "Now, I has a little problem for you." I said, "Well, Dr. Drumheller, what?" "I want you to determine the amount of radiation in any organ of any type body after intake of any parent-daughter pair." And I told him, "Well, do you have research?" "Oh, no. You'll have to go to the farm area and get a litter of pigs and kill one every hour and take the body apart to see what radiation effects will be. Use some Tellurium-132. Now, I have to admit, I've helped butcher a lot of animals. Growing up on a farm, it's just part of life. But it wasn't fun killing those little pigs. So that's when I decided I would take some of the radioactive material and I would drink it. And then I went and laid in the whole body counter and I watched it go through my system. And you could tell when it got into the stomach, out of the stomach, and well, the Atomic Energy Commission said it was by far the best research they ever had. And I couldn't do everything. I couldn't do the lactating female, for example, but besides that... And when they had that little incident over in Chernobyl, I'm sure they used our research to figure out what effects the radiation would have. It wouldn't be under our names then, it would have been U.S. government. But to my knowledge, that's the first time the U.S. government was able to figure out what radiation effects would be. Never knew what was going to happen in Hanford. Next summer they weren't hiring, and immediately Encyclopedia Britannica wanted me to be selling encyclopedias. Now I have to admit, I was not a good salesman. I think I convinced more people not to buy than to buy. First three came up to me, I said, "You, financially, you cannot afford it." I didn't have money for research books. This one young woman came up to me, she lived a block from the public library. I said, "You do not need to spend money on research books." As I say, I was a poor salesman. I was in the black neighborhood, in East Pasco. Melba and I went out there the day that Martin Luther King had been killed. And several of the older, bigger blacks were coming after us, threatening us. They didn't want white people out there that day. That's when I had 6 of my former students make a circle around me and Melba and say, "We are going in. You're not going to bother Mr. and Mrs. Hauser." I know several of the black students respected me and Melba for several different reasons. When we first moved to Pasco, the coach, Coach Foxley, he was requiring all his players to have crew cuts. Now, there was only one black barber in Pasco, and he didn't give crew cuts. So none of the blacks had crew cuts, so they couldn't play on the team. And so I said, "I'll coach them." And there were seven good basketball players who didn't have crew cuts. They couldn't play on the varsity, so I coached them. And we had the pleasure of playing the varsity team 2 times, and we beat them 2 times. Eventually that coach, Foxley, left Pasco, and blacks were allowed to play on varsity without crew cuts. It was just an experience. After in Pasco, I was offered a job at Eastern Oregon University in LeGrand. Driving down the hill into Eastern Oregon, there was nothing but dirty snow on the ground. I was also offered a job at Blue Mountain in Pendleton. When we were coming down Cabbage Hill, there was nothing but green, so we moved to Pendleton. And I worked the next 9 years as head of math there at Blue Mountain Community College when I was offered a job at Mount Hood Community College in Gresham, Oregon, where I moved and spent the next 25 years there as head of math, physics, engineering. How much time I can figure I had about 19,000 different people as students. I can be walking down the street in Portland and have a former student come up to me and say, "Oh, Mr. Hauser, do you remember me? I was in your calculus class in 1986. They will then say, not having remembered them, "Were you one of my top students or one of my troublemakers?" I remember them a whole lot more than I remember the body of the class. You got both answers. It's an experience. There, teaching at Mount Hood, several of the other math teachers around, and I developed curriculum for every Oregon community college. We're writing textbooks in applied mathematics, 23 some textbooks from agriculture to welding, everything in between. Eventually, the government of Saudi Arabia found out about our work and invited us to come share our mathematics textbooks we had and design curriculum for. So, I had the pleasure of bringing all the textbooks to Saudi Arabia. We get there, and customs was rather interesting because they opened up the suitcase and went through every book to see if there was any offending material. This would have been nudity or anything deemed inappropriate. The culture there was very different. The women were not allowed to go outside without being fully covered. They would have to go with a male escort, still weren't allowed to drive. There was a lot of control over what people could and couldn't do, so they had to check all the books coming in to make sure they didn't have our offending material. Eventually they didn't find any of them in mathematics textbooks. But the next day, we met with the king and crown prince. You go into this room and they give you what we felt was rather strong tea. And if you weren't wanting any more, you had to move the cup back and forth, because as soon as you stopped it, they would fill it up. We assumed they were slaves or servants there serving us. But it was an experience. Well, the next day we sat down to work. I was basically writing down different mathematical fields for them, like a complex number system or different applied mathematics for agriculture, figuring out when in their education they needed to learn certain concepts. Now, it was really rewarding to work with these people from all over the world to design a curriculum for the people of this country. Well, just the men, actually. It was an experience going into Saudi Arabia. In Rome, I was talking to this very nice woman, very pleasant. Her husband had the H&H initials like mine. And we were talking, and she was very pleasant and all, but as soon as she and her husband got on the plane, they were in first class, and I was in the back of the plane. And when we landed in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, I went to talk to her, and she couldn't say anything to me. She'd have to have been fully covered at this time, and this was different than when in Rome when talking with a strange male. There was a lot of control over what people could and couldn't do. That flight was an experience, though. When in Rome, they tell us to get on to Saudi Airlines, so we did. Then they told us to get off. Then they told us we could board. Then they told us we had to get up. Third time they put us on the plane and off the plane, I asked them why. Well, the pilot says the sky is too crowded. And I told him I hope he never flies to O'Hare or JFK. Flying down next to the Mediterranean, I understood what they meant. So that was the day Israel invaded Beirut. And we were in an Arab airline. You could look out the window and see these Israeli fighters and bombers flying all around us, shooting all around us. And you could look down in Beirut and see all the bombs going off. I told my wife later, they celebrate the 4th of July very differently here. They were still fighting the 2,000-year-old war between Israel and Arabs, and I didn't necessarily need to be in the middle of that. First time I ever saw war from the air, though. But, as I say, I've had many nasty experiences with death. First time, I was sent to take a troop of 4 down to the tanks, where a young man had been killed in the tanks. I suppose they thought I needed to see death in that form. The young man, first time out firing the tanks, he had stuck his head behind the recoil. He leaned down to tie his shoes, and, well, when the tank fires, the recoil comes about 3 inches from the side of the tank, and that's where his head was. Sort of a messy experience. And for dinner that night, they were serving beef and tomato something. Well, the service called it shit on a shingle. Just looked a little bit too much like what we were cleaning up. One of the few times I didn't eat. I had a young man hung himself in the barracks. I walked in there, saw him hanging, so I grabbed a bayonet, came running over to him to cut him down. That's when the quartermaster said to me, "Don't you dare cut that sheet! I have to be responsible for it." So, I just held him up there while they untied him. I knew some men who had trouble after the war. I had a former observer clear out enemy land. I was sure the North Koreans were going to get him, so he radioed in and asked us to walk him out, which meant we had artillery going off just ahead of him so we could get from where he was to the new area. He had some trouble after that. He'd wake up in the middle of the night, scream and grab a bayonet, come running down where the bunks were and just shove it in there. Never did get one of the guys, but I guess it was one of those nervous, emotional things after being surrounded by North Koreans and having to fight your way out. Some of it was on my order too. We were at Chosun Reservoir. I was given the command to shoot a 105 airburst on top of the dam every 30 seconds. That's where the Chinese were coming across. 105 going off the top of the dam pretty much nixed their options of coming across. But as frozen as the ground was, steel would just bounce off, skip off the ice. And I did see through binoculars several people who lost feet and legs and sometimes more. War is not pretty and clean. Anyway, that's probably the best I can remember it. It's sometimes you try to remember these things and your mind just doesn't work the way it should. You always just had to ask yourself, why did I come back? I knew so many didn't. One that got me here recently, I saw on the news North Korea was sending back remains, 30-some remains. Now I had to ask myself, how many were my men? You had to think, well, I'm pretty sure these would have been prisoners of war, because those, my men, that were killed on the mountains, I don't think they'd be able to find any remains. Even their dog tags probably would. War isn't fun. I'd have to say, I only came back by the grace of the good Lord. For me to meet my wife and have all our beautiful children and all our grandchildren, But as I said, I've outdone so many death sentences. Doctor said there was no way I could live when I was born. I was the same weight when I was 6 months old as right out of the womb. My parents kept me alive on overripe bananas. That was all my stomach could manage. I have to say all of this is because of them. See, Dad wasn't allowed to go to school after the 5th grade because Grandpa felt that Dad was by far the best horseman he ever had. He could do more with a team of horses than anyone. I'm pretty sure that all Dad wanted was to go and keep learning in school, you know. He'd give me puzzles and projects when I was a kid. Early on, he told me, you go devise a 5-horse evener, so that all 5 horses plow the same amount. Now, 4 horses, anyone could. 6 horses, anyone could. But 5, it's rather complicated. Because you had to have 3 horses on one side and 2 on the other. But they had to all plow the same amount, so each half would have to pull 3/5 of this one, and this would have to pull 2/5. But each one of the horses would have to pull 1/5, so you had to do a double tree here and a single tree there, which triple tree, which is a double tree and a single tree combined. But then you had to make sure that the plow stayed straight on its path. Well, anyway. I never knew anyone else who was able to make one. We only had 4 horses, so we didn't need a 5-horse evening. My wife tells me I tell too many stories. I'll stop people anywhere. At a restaurant, walking down the street. I find it builds connection with people better than anything else I know. People are made by the stories they tell. And if you tell a story to them, they might tell a story to you, and that's how I've met very interesting people over my life. I don't know what the point of all this is. I don't know if these stories matter. I don't know if your stories matter. I want to hear them anyway. People are made by the stories they tell. Class dismissed.